We're going to get started. We're 5 past, so we'll get started so Robert can get going here. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. We got a full house. This is really great to see. This is only, I think, the second public event that we've had in this theater, so it's nice to see a packed house. It's amazing. My name's Colleen Cole. I work in the programming department here at Vancouver Public Library. I'm just going to make a couple of brief announcements and do some housekeeping stuff, and then I'm going to pass it over to Robert, who's going to be doing the presentation. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we're gathered on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we thank them for their hospitality. Now, tonight's podcast primer, this is a 3-part series. We have another event next Tuesday, so they're at the same time every week on a Tuesday. Next week is the 16th. It's going to actually be in a different location. So if you wanted to come to the next one in the series, it's going to be in the Alma Van Duzen room, which is just on the lower levels. On the 30th, 2 weeks after that, we're going to have the 3rd part in the series. We've got a poster. It's actually on the poster outside if you want to have a look at the other 2 sessions and come to those. And that one will be here in the same theater. So the 30th is going to be here. The 16th is going to be in the Alma. So hopefully you'll join us for those as well. Let's see. Now, just a reminder, if you have any devices, please turn them off. Just set them to mute or turn them off entirely just so we don't have any disruptions. Now, we got a full house. If some of you are coming in, if you want to, it's fine to sit along the sides of the aisles, or if you want to sit in front, if you don't mind sitting on the floor. It's brand new theater, so it's pretty clean. We don't want to say no. We don't really want to turn anybody away, but we have to be. Yeah, that's okay. There's a seat down front if anybody wants it. Okay? All right. If you need, washrooms are going to be, if you go outside, they're just going to be on the other end of the floor. We've got trans-inclusive washrooms there. And in case of an emergency, the exits are going to be stairwells that are also located on the other side of the floor. So if anything happens and the alarm goes off, I'll be here. You can just follow me down to the stairwells and we'll go straight down outside the building. And just a reminder, this is actually going to be live streamed tonight. So we're going to be doing audio and video live streaming. So if any of you are concerned about privacy, just to be aware of that. They're going to be having some questions at the end, so if you want to, they might set some time aside for some audio, off-camera questions, if you want to wait till the end, yeah? Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about this. Tonight we have a huge thank you, actually. It's the BC Alliance for Arts and Culture. They're doing this series with us, and we have a huge, huge thanks for them to making this possible, this series. BC Alliance for Arts and Culture, they're a nonprofit provincial organization. They've been working since 1986 to advocate, inform, and connect and serve BC's creative community. Their members include organizations, professional associations, not-for-profit groups, artists and cultural workers throughout British Columbia. And so tonight with us, we have, from the Alliance, we have Robert Ouimet. He's the president of Bigsnit Media Consulting in Vancouver. Robert joined CBC in the 1980s, creating and producing half a dozen radio shows, and winning CBC over 30 international awards during his time, including the Prix Italia, New York Festival, and multiple Webby Awards. Since 2003, Robert has worked on an independent media consultant, working with such clients as Microsoft, National Film Board of Canada, the Vancouver 2010 Olympics, Metro Vancouver, Just for Laughs Comedy Festival, and many more. So if you want to find out more about Robert and his work, please visit his site. It's https://bigsnit.com. So without any more hesitation, I'd like you to help me in giving Robert a really warm welcome, and thanks for coming tonight.
There's one actual seat up here if somebody wants to grab it. So thank you all for coming. I just want to do a quick, there's 2 seats up front. I want to do a quick poll. Who here has listened to a podcast? Okay, so you're above the average Canadian. In Canada, it's about 55% Canadians. Who here has created a podcast? Okay, great. Who here wants to create a podcast? Awesome. Okay, perfect. So let me tell you a little bit about my podcasting history, because my podcasting history started before there was podcasting. I grew up in a little town in Manitoba called Dauphin, which is about 200 miles from Winnipeg. That's Dauphin in the 1970s. And I didn't have the internet. Internet didn't exist. I didn't have access to hundreds of thousands. There's actually 650,000 podcasts currently registered with iTunes. So I didn't have access to any of that. What I did have was radio. And I don't know if you know this, but at night in Canada, radio stations have to lower their transmission frequency. And what happens is at night, radio stations from further away can reach you when you're in a little town called Dauphin, Manitoba. So I would sit in my basement, my horrible basement room, and I would listen to stations from Chicago, like WLS, or stations from Minneapolis, St. Paul, like KSTP. And I'd listen to stations like Windsor, where they all talked like this, except they had a Canadian accent. And at KTLA in Los Angeles, they did the news. And so that was my world of listening to, that was my world of listening to shows from all over the place with different people and different points of views. And it opened up this whole fantastic world for me. And I loved it. I was like, I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s. This is me. I got this dream job. I was 15, and I was hired to work at the local radio station. And I was a disc jockey all through grade 12, 11, and 12. I had no clue what I was doing. I was apparently very short-sighted. And I was asked to do, country music shows and shows about anything that wasn't rock and roll, because my boss hated rock and roll. And at night, we all knew that he and his family would have dinner around 6. And he would never listen to the radio after 6. So we would pull out our Rolling Stones records and our Jimi Hendrix albums, and we would play all this stuff until he heard it, and then he would come over to the radio station and yell at us. So that was me in the 70s. I went from there to, I was amazing. I got this job offer on the phone, and from a town, even bigger small town called Portage-la-Prairie, which is in the middle of Manitoba on the Trans-Canada Highway. There's like nothing there except an Air Force base. And the guy hired me on the phone. And he said, "Do you want the job?" And I said, "Yeah, but I got to check with my parents." Because he thought I was really, because I had a big voice, because I was 15 and had a really big voice. So anyway, I went from there to Calgary. I worked in news in Calgary at a station there. And then I moved to Winnipeg. I got this job in the summer working for, what, it's the 80s, okay? Come on. I'm not wearing shorts, but the shoulder pads, I'm rocking that, right?
I would say one more button.
Yeah. So I took this job in the summer. I was actually going to go to law school. I had worked as a radio announcer for 10 years, and I wanted to go to law school. And so I went and I did all what I needed to do, got accepted into law school in April, and I took this job for the summer at the CBC on a show called The Radio Show. And it was as a production assistant, which basically meant go get coffee, go get beer, edit tape till you're, dead. And I loved it. It was so much fun. And I'd never listened to the CBC. Like, I was a private radio guy. I listened to rock and roll stuff. I loved all it. And I just fell in love with what was going on there. So I started at the radio show as a PA. When August came around, I decided not to go to law school. I stayed. I ended up as the executive producer. And then I went from there to Toronto and worked at CBC in Toronto. And then I ended up coming to Vancouver in the late 80s. And in Vancouver, this isn't me, this is somebody else. This is Leora Kornfeld, who's now a professor in Toronto. We created a bunch of shows here. I did a lot of network shows here. One of them we did was called Real Time. And Real Time was live to the network. So in Canada, we have all these time zones, and most shows that you hear from the CBC, for instance, are on time delay. So they release them once in the East, and then they tape delay them out. So what you're hearing is really a repeat when you live on the West Coast. We did all our shows live, and then we started using the internet in 1994. So we were texting people while we were doing the show. And I just fell in love with the internet and thought it was fantastic. And so we did Real Time, that was really fun. Then I moved on to do a thing called CBC Radio 3, which was all internet based. We had 3 websites, and then we also did audio on CBC Radio. So we had about 40 hours a week of radio on traditional radio, and then we had the internet stuff. Radio 3 morphed into a digital magazine, which was a multimedia magazine. And this was pre-podcasting. This was, we actually delivered this very large package of files through the course of the week. So if you subscribed, over the course of the week, we would be constantly downloading material so that Friday we could get all of the video and the pictures and the audio and all this stuff that we wanted you to see to your device by Friday. And on Friday, it would pop open and say you can watch the magazine now. And we had video in there and audio and all this stuff. This is all pre-podcasting. Go ahead.
There's a seat here.
I think there's a seat there, waiting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. So that's sort of my history. I left the CBC shortly after we launched Radio 3, and I left, ironically, because I didn't want to work in radio anymore. I wanted to, and I was working in multimedia stuff with the Radio 3 stuff, and that was really exciting to me. That's what I wanted to concentrate on. So I would have never thought, projecting out 15 or 16 years, that I would be here talking to you about what is essentially audio. But I love it because it's, for me, like breathing. Making audio for me is like breath. It's fun, it's creative, it's really accessible, and you can traverse the world with it really easily. Now, I want you to listen to something. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to listen to something. Tell me what you hear. Bring this up a little bit. Not very loud. Turn it up some more. Listen real carefully. Close your eyes. Where are you? Anybody? Where do you think you are? Sorry? Restaurant? Anybody else? Yeah. Okay, so we had some ideas there. I'm going to play you one more. Sorry for the little hit. Airport? Street? Tornado? Could be. Recognize any of the language? Not really, eh? It's kind of hidden. All right, so that's actually a street in Germany, in Berlin. And if we play it long enough, we're going to hear some people speaking German. The whole point of that was to say to you that you, with audio, can create a place simply by putting in some sound, or by the manner in which you speak, maybe by using a certain kind of music, by setting a tone that lets the person that you're speaking to create their own pictures. When you were listening and I asked you to close your eyes, you were listening really, because it's not very loud, you're listening really carefully, right? You had to listen really carefully. And from that, your brain started to try to analyze what it was hearing. It was starting to point out to you, oh, that might be a train station, or that might be a street. All right, so I love audio. So tonight, what I'm going to do is talk to you about making audio, making podcasts, and how you can start to do that. If you're already doing it, I'll have some tips up near the end about how you can make what you're doing better. I also should say to you that I'm very opinionated, and I will tell you what I think of stuff, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I've been doing this for a long time, and that's what I think. The other thing I will say to you is that the wonderful thing about podcasting is that online there are so many resources. If there's anything you need to know, go search in Google, and you're going to find a YouTube video from somebody who's going to explain it to you. They're not necessarily going to give you the same thing I would give you, but that isn't necessarily wrong. I've been making podcasts, so forget about the radio stuff and all that. I've been making podcasts, both for myself and for clients, for about 15 years. In 2000, I don't know what it was, maybe 4, Raincoast Books asked me to do a series of podcasts with some of their authors. And so one of the first podcasts that I got paid to make was for Raincoast Books, where they hired me to create podcasts. And one of the great experiences I had was spending a day with Anthony Bourdain, who was here to promote a book. And it wasn't a sit-down interview. Here was the challenge. Robert, he's going on a media tour through the day. You can go with him and talk to him while he's doing that, and that's going to be your podcast. So I put a body mic on Anthony, and I put a body mic on me, and I took a shotgun mic with me, and we jumped in the car. Now, I have to tell you, I was super intimidated because I'd read tons about him, And I thought, well, this is really gonna be work. Like, this is gonna be a lot of work. So I go to the hotel to meet them in the morning, and I'm always early. Sue Bealey will tell you this. We were supposed to meet at 7. I showed up at 6:45, and in the lobby is Anthony Bourdain. He's been there since 20 to 7, because he's even earlier than me, right? And he was like, I'm here to work. What do you need? I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. And I got to spend the day, and what you're gonna hear is just a really short clip of us talking. And the idea was there was never going to be a sit-down interview. It was always just on the go through the course of the day. Anthony in his normal environment. No, it's okay, come on in.
We're all very comfortable hanging out together and talking about food. You know, however you may present yourself to the dining room or in public, as far as attitude and you know, self-importance, there's no lying among chefs. Everybody pretty much knows their, you know, how good they are or limited they are, and they certainly, it's more of a blue collar, you know, just like firemen hanging out after work or cooks.
We're on West Georgia Street outside Shaw Cable because he's done the Shaw morning show. So what you're hearing in the back is the actual traffic from the street.
Function workers, except, you know, we're eating and drinking really, really well and talking about food. Chefs all over the world, you know, whether I've met them or not, we all kind of end up having the same conversation. And then we certainly share a lot of character traits. Shy people generally, I mean, or they're protecting a soft core. You know, socially dysfunctional, you know, that's what's very comforting about the hierarchy of the kitchen is, you know, you built yourself a fairly rigid, safe world, you know, filled with pointy objects, but I mean, you're given enough time there, you know how to work those levers. You know, we're less sure of ourselves, or most chefs certainly are less sure of themselves, you know, among real people, you know, trying to, like, you know, have normal human relationships or, you know, conduct business in the you know, the regular, the non-restaurant business community. That's hard, you know, and I think a lot of people are instinctively shy of that kind of contact or that kind of, this kind of relations.
I love all that noise in the background, right? Because it adds to the texture of what we talked about. And if you listen to these, there's 3 episodes with him, and they're in and out of the car, and you're hearing car doors, and you're hearing people in restaurants, and we're running through a book signing, and you're hearing all this stuff. And I revel in all that sound, because to me, it paints a picture that's part of the whole experience. So I would encourage you, when you start thinking about what it is you want to make, to not be afraid of sound, right? People that make podcasts tend to get really obsessed with trying to be in a quiet place. And in some cases, that's really, really important. But in a lot of cases, it kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? Putting him in a sterile environment would have been awful, right? Having him walk around in the street smoking cigarettes and talking about stuff really, really made the piece way more interesting. All right, so enough about me. I'm going to talk about podcasting. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. Why do one in the first place? How hard can it possibly be? What do you need to do it? What's the workflow like? And this is sort of around me helping you understand that what you're about to take on involves some work. And planning that work sometimes helps you succeed. I would suggest that 75% of people who start podcasts peter out just because they run out of juice. They run out of time, they run out of energy, run out of ideas. And a little bit of planning up front would make that better, because you might say, you know, it's only going to be 8 episodes. That's all it's going to be. I've done podcasts that were 1 episode, right? It was never supposed to be more than that. And then if you're making stuff, how can you make it better? What are some little tips that will help you make it a better thing? If you have questions, throw up your hand. I'm going to try to drive through. There's a lot of stuff here, so I'm going to drive through pretty quick, but I'd like to answer your questions, and we will have time at the end to ask questions. But if I talk about something you don't understand, or there's something you want me to clarify, just throw up your hand, and I'll either answer it, or I'll defer it, or I'll say I don't really know. All right, we have a blank screen, that's interesting. Okay, why should we do a podcast in the first place? Well, there's a huge audience. I think I mentioned about 55% of Canadians have listened to a podcast. There are about 660,000 podcasts registered today, as far as we can tell. Nobody really actually knows what the number is. The usage for podcasts has been this upward curve, really, for the last 7 or 8 years. And it sort of makes sense, because we all have devices that allow us to listen to podcasts really easily, and we're totally traveling all the time now, right? Canadians are becoming more urbanized. That means spending more time in transit. That means listening or watching stuff on your phone, right? And we consume a huge amount of audio in a week. With radio, it's like something like 7 hours a week, and that's probably a lot of in-car listening. And with podcasts, it's something like 3 or 4 hours a week, right? So there's a great audience there. I think more importantly for me, I'm a content creator, that's my thing, is the podcast gives you complete control. Nobody tells you what you can and can't do on your podcast. Nobody controls the gates. And I'll explain a little bit later how they actually work mechanically in the internet. There's no gate. You're the gate. You do what you want. And short of like stealing stuff from people, nobody's going to shut you down. So the other thing is there's very few creative boundaries. Audio has been, kind of what we're talking about, has been being made for like 150 years. So there's a lot of really interesting history in audio and what you can do with it. And it's never, before there was television, that didn't stop people from making dramas and entertainment shows and all sorts of programs that were simply heard. And so it's a great medium to let you create whatever you want. If somebody comes to me with an idea for a podcast and says it's about this, I've never, ever said, can't do it. Sometimes it's expensive, but they're all possible because a lot of it is theater in the mind, right? Sound, music, pace, tone, voices. The other cool thing is that it can be super local. Like you can do a podcast about your neighborhood, and maybe you'll only have 20 listeners, but it could be a really powerful thing in your neighborhood or your community. I think schools, some kids are doing podcasts for their school, right? Instead of doing a yearbook, do a podcast. That's pretty cool. Do it all the way through the year instead of at the end of the year. It's not really different than when I was growing up. We had a radio station in our school, our high school. Podcasts allow you to do that. And the barrier to entry is pretty low. I wouldn't say it's free, because it's not, but you can do it on the cheap pretty well. I would say money spent will help you. And as you'll see as I talk a little bit later about gear, the less gear you have, the more work it's going to be quite honest. The other thing is, and I mentioned this, there's a huge support system. YouTube is full of great advice and some bad advice, but it's full of advice. And if you want to know how to do something or use the software better that you're using or trying to figure out how to get around something, there will be an answer somewhere on YouTube or somewhere in Google. That's because thousands of people are doing it. It wasn't the same. When I started doing this 15 years ago, nobody was doing it. Like I would have to actually explain what a podcast was to people, and they would look at me and go, I don't understand. Like they just didn't get it. So it's a whole different world now, and that's awesome. Okay, how hard could it possibly be? Well, here's how it works, and the ecosystem for podcasts is very simple. You make an audio file, that's your podcast, and it is hosted somewhere on the internet. I'm going to sketch this out in a sec. I just want to walk through what it is first. The secret to podcasts is what's called really simple syndication, RSS. If any of you were bloggers before there were podcasts, you know that when you blog, you could have people subscribe to your blog, and they would get updates on your blog whenever you posted something through RSS. RSS is just a file, a text file that says, there's a new episode. Here's where it is. And your RSS reader checks for those files on a constant basis. And when there's new information, it says, here's the new information. So we've had this in our hands since the late 80s. And in fact, at CBC, we were moving files and stuff back and forth using RSS because inside of RSS, there's a little thing called enclosure. And an enclosure is any kind of file. So somebody realized you could put an audio file in there as an enclosure and send it so that it would get updated when you looked at it in your RSS reader. The world changed when somebody linked their device to the RSS feed. So that now, instead of just getting a notice, it was actually showing up on your device. Okay? Pre-podcast, we used to do this, but you get the file and you have to load it on your MP3 player manually. So RSS is the heart of why this works. It's what makes it different than just putting an audio file on the internet. And you can certainly do that. In fact, when you do podcasts, typically you do both. You just put the file on the internet, you can play it from the file, or you can subscribe to it through a podcast service. So the other secret is what's called the directory. Some people call this the podcast platform. I think that's kind of BS. iTunes is a directory. Come on in. It's okay. There was a chair, but you can go sit up on the thing if you want.
I'll go sit on it.
Okay.
Sorry.
iTunes and all these places where you can listen to get your podcasts don't do anything except read the RSS feed. They don't host the file. They don't do anything. They're just like a phone book. What they do, though, is enable you to get that information to your device. So Google Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, now called Apple Podcasts, are all directories, and there's a bunch more other ones. I mentioned that you might or might not put it on your website. So if you want to do this fairly inexpensively, and you don't have a website, you can actually have a lot of the services that allow you to podcast will actually create a page for you. And I'll talk about that in a sec. The people that actually host the file will actually create a page for you. So if you don't have a website, you can use that page. And I'll show you what one of those looks like. So that's the ecosystem. The hardest part of all this is your creative vision. The technical parts of it are really, really simple, and they're so much easier now than they used to be. So the only thing really stopping you from doing this successfully is your ideas. Okay, so here's the ecosystem. So you make stuff. You're going to put it up on a podcast host, that MP3 file that you've made. Most of these podcast hosts today will make this file for you. We used to make this XML. This is an XML file, the syndication file. We used to make these by hand. We used to actually write out the stuff. It's a real pain in the ass. Almost all the podcast hosts will do that for you now. So you upload the file, and then you give it information about the episode, who's in it, how long it is, all that kind of stuff, and they'll generate that XML file for you. That XML file is one address. It'll be whatever it is, blah, 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 XML. That address you give to the directories, iTunes, Google, all those guys. You just give them that feed address. That address doesn't change, and they just check it. And when you put new content up, that file gets updated, they get new content, and they list it on their list. So your listener gets it either directly because they've already subscribed to you, or they might actually get it from your webpage. Typically what you do with your podcast is you offer it up as a subscription, but you also usually embed it in your webpage so that people can play it right from the website. So those are two different things, but it's the same file. So you're going to get measurement on the use of that file. Let me just say one thing quick about the podcast host. These are sort of a new thing. So when I started podcasting, there was one or two. Libsyn has been around forever, so it was one, and there was a couple of others. But we used to just host the files on our web servers. But what happens is, as those files get asked for by different people, sometimes they're just downloading them, sometimes they're playing them in line. Most web servers are set up to serve web pages, not media. So these guys specialize in serving MP3 files and serving them well. And they're really inexpensive. There's no reason not to use them, other than they do cost a little bit of money. Here's what that XML file looks like. It's awful to write. I mean, it's not code. It's just, it's called extensive markup language. So you define a category. So this one is iTunes owner. There'll be information after that that says who owns it. That's all it is tags. So, but the important piece of this is that I use a web, sort of a podcast host. I don't actually ever write that file. I just put this information in a bunch of fields. Boom, done. They generate that file for me. So this is the working bit. This is the important part. Inside that RSS feed is this thing that says enclosure and the link to your MP3 file. This bit here, media, Blueberry, com, that's the web host. That's the podcast host I use in this case. And then that's the name of the podcast. So that address becomes sort of where the directories know to go to get the file. So here's so Blueberry's the host, so they're the place where I upload the podcast to, and they generate the RSS feed for me. They actually create a page. So this is one of my clients. They generate a page, a web page. So if I didn't have a website, I could just use this. I could send people to this page where they can click to subscribe, and they can also listen in line. And this list goes down to number 1, obviously. Here's how exactly the same information shows up on iTunes. So they're all reading the same file. They're reading the XML file, but the beauty of XML files is they remove content from design. So what the XML file allows them to do is get the information and then put stuff around it to make it look pretty. So it looks completely different on iTunes, looks different again on Stitcher, looks different again on Spotify. Yes?
Does it just automatically go to all those different hosting sites, like when you?
Yeah. So I register the RSS feed with the directory.
Okay.
So I have to have an account at Spotify,
Okay.
and in the account it says, "Where's your feed?" And I put in that XML address. Done. And I never go there again.
What sort of turnaround time do you find that takes? Is it a week?
No, it's like minutes. Yeah. I would say, if you're doing it in a hurry and somebody's counting on it, give them an hour. It's really fast. Some of them are, I shouldn't say that, they're not all the same. Spotify, I think, has to do a little bit of work first. They're fussier. iTunes, I've had it turn around like in minutes, and I've had it take half a day. They're really fast now. They're a lot better. Yes?
There's a thing with iTunes. We have been trying to post our podcast to iTunes. We're using Anchor FM. And we have podcasts on Spotify and everywhere, but not in iTunes.
Yes. So it's probably an issue with the file, the RSS file. iTunes has very specific recommendations on the feed, and they're very fussy. They just reject them. Yeah. But you can take that feed and you can go and see if you can get it to validate at iTunes, and if it doesn't validate, you should be able to find out why.
Okay.
Yeah. 90% of the problems people have with their podcast getting it released is in relation to that file and the directory rejecting it for some reason. When we hand wrote them, it was usually my fault, right? Because I missed a tag. The directories are not smart, right? They just pull the data in. And if the data is not formed correctly, they'll reject it. If the image size is incorrect for iTunes, they'll reject it. Okay, and then this is what that same podcast looks like on my client's website. So you can play it, and then you can't really read this because it's a bit washed out, but you can subscribe. There's all the different services there you can subscribe to. Some people wonder, which service should I use? Use all of them, right? There's no cost. So those directories are free. So use as many of them as you can. iTunes is still the leader. Most people are using iTunes, but not everybody. Google Play is getting pretty popular. Spotify is very popular. So I spread it around, and they will change over time. Okay, what do you need? Any other questions before I move on? Yes?
When you upload your newest episode, that file's automatically updated? Is that how that works?
Yeah.
Okay.
So with the podcast host, as soon as I save that upload, it updates the XML file. And if I go back, well, this is just torture.
Again, another benefit of using a specific host.
Yeah. In the old days, you just updated the file, so you just uploaded a new one to the file server. In that, I won't go back to the XML file because it frightens me. At the very beginning, it says, how often is this updated? And you can put in a number. I didn't put it in, they did. I think it's every hour. So the host, the directory knows, don't bother checking more than once an hour because it's not going to be updated faster than that. Yes?
How do you choose what host you want, like Blueberry versus SoundCloud?
Excellent question, and I'm going to get to that. I'm glad you asked that question. Okay, what do you need? You need an audio recorder to make podcasts. Can you do it on your phone? Sure. Can you do it on your computer? Sure. Is it better to use a recorder? Yes. But you don't have to. If you're just starting out, use your laptop, use the free software you have, play around, figure out how it works, then figure out what your limitations are. 90% of people use 10% of the software's capabilities. Okay? So before you go buy stuff, figure out what the stuff you have isn't letting you do. Then you can buy the right stuff to help you solve the challenge you have. You're going to need a microphone. My laptop has a microphone in it. I can record on my laptop to free software that comes with my Apple and make a podcast. Is it going to be great? Maybe, but probably not. It's not going to sound great. It might be great because I'm brilliant. But microphones come in a couple of different flavors. You have to understand that a microphone is an analog device. It records a sound. So I make a sound. To record that sound, you need an analog reaction. Computers are digital. So we convert that analog signal into a digital signal. Now, most microphones that you see on TV, people singing into mics, those are regular analog microphones. To go into a digital world, they have to go through a converter box, which is called an ADDA converter, sometimes called a DAC, digital audio converter. That takes that analog signal, turns it into bits that can be read by the computer. However, because podcasting is so friggin' popular, somebody said, a lot of people are recording their podcasts on their computer. Why don't we make a microphone that just plugs directly into the computer that has a built-in DAC? So those are USB mics. They're a lot cheaper. They go directly into your laptop, no box, and they work pretty well. They have some limitations, which I'll talk about. You're going to need some kind of editing software. Now, this is not absolutely true. So I have a friend, Roland Tanlau, who has been podcasting as long as I have been. Roland doesn't edit anything. So if you do a podcast with Roland, Roland says, Robert, what about your electric car? And you start talking, and people deliver coffee, and stuff breaks, and people interrupt you. And then he goes, thank you for telling me about your electric car. He stops it, and that's the podcast. Whatever happened is what happened. Most people I know edit their podcasts. You take out stuff, you move stuff around. Non-linear editors, or DAWs, digital audio workstations, those are just fancy ways of saying something that lets you edit audio. This is a terrible analogy, but it's not much different than using Word. Except you visually see the audio, you hear it, you can mark it, select it, cut it, move it, replace it, replicate it, all that stuff. The other difference is that you can have multiple channels of audio. So to stay with the really bad Word analogy, that's like, okay, I've done the editing to the document, now I'm going to add pictures and maybe some formatting to make it look pretty. So that's the other part that you can do with a digital audio workstation, a DAW, is edit and mix. Make it, add sounds, add music, change the tone, all this stuff. You are going to need graphics. Oh, sorry, question.
Just with regards to the sounds, let's say I'm doing a podcast with another person and I show them, talk about an animal and I want her to hear what they sound like and I play it for her. Should I cut that bit out of that audio and then insert the audio of the animal separately, or?
It's a good question. It depends on how you're communicating with them and whether or not you can record a clean version of that when you do it. So the answer might be yes, the answer might be no. If you were doing this and you asked me to consult, I would ask you to tell me how are you doing it right now, how much time is it taking you, and there's another way to do it so you don't have to do that, and it's going to involve this. So I have a client who's got not quite the same situation, but he has a USB mic, and he records on his laptop. And he does an interview, and so the mic's on his guest. So his questions are all off mic. So what he does is he goes home, and he records all his questions, and then he edits them in. And I said to him, well, how long is it taking you to do that, James? And he said, I don't know, about 25 hours. And I said, well, dude, like, how much is your time worth? So he spent a little bit of money, and he bought a different kind of recorder with 2 microphones, and he doesn't spend 25 hours doing that part anymore, right? So he paid me quite a bit of money, but I saved him a lot of time and money. So the answer to your question is it sort of depends on, maybe what you're doing now is okay and it sounds all right. If it doesn't sound all right, you need to fix it. How do we fix it? And what's the best way to do it? I don't want to, in order for that sound, for them to be able to hear it properly and for you to record it properly, it needs to go to 2 different places. So you need equipment to be able to do that. So you may be better off just cutting it in after. Okay, you're going to need graphics. iTunes is very fussy. I think it's 1600 pixels square, maximum 3000 pixels square. If it's 3001, it'll reject it. If you don't know what pixels are, you're going to need somebody to do this for you. Your channel, your podcast channel will have a graphic, but you can also have graphics for each episode. I typically don't do that for my clients, but it depends. Like I do have one series that I did because each episode was very different, so we had separate graphics. Every time you change something like that in your XML file, there may be an issue. So you want to make sure if you do that to check them. And show notes. Oh, sorry, yes, question.
If you want to put music into the podcast,
Yes.
electronic copyright.
Yes. Yes.
How do you know what music you can put?
Yes. Oh boy. I have a slide about copyright coming up,
Okay.
so I will answer your question.
Okay.
You're not going to like the answer. Show notes. So you don't have to do show notes, but if you host your podcast and you have a website with that podcast, having show notes, which are basically bullet points on what's in the podcast, will get picked up by search engines. And that's very helpful. Pretty soon the search engines will be able to read the actual audio and you won't need to bother. But for now, it's a good idea to do it. It helps people know what's in the episode. And you will need a podcast host. So there was a question earlier about how do you pick one. I'm going to go through some of them and what they cost. Gear. So recorders. This is one of the most popular recorders out there. It's called Zoom. This is the H4, which is the middle costing one, but it's $300. These are Canadian prices. I don't work for Long & McQuaid, but I use their website to get you Canadian prices. This allows you to put 4 microphones in. It also has 2 microphones built in, so you can just take it and point it at somebody and talk to them. It'll work. Or if you have external mics, you can plug them in. Runs on batteries, also on AC. This is an unbelievably cheap price for what it does. Do I love it? No. Yes?
Those mics plug in with XLR.
No, those mics the mics that plug into the device are XLR.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it's got these built-in mics, which is pretty cool. And they actually sound really good. For $300, this is awesome.
Which one do you love?
This one. This is a company called Sound Devices. They have been making audio recorders for field recording forever. This is built out of aluminum. It is bulletproof. It has a button on it that says record. It's massive. And it's rubberized. And if it's dark and raining and you don't see, you can find it and hit it and it'll start. It's super goof-proof. It just works. So I have the big brother of this, and then I have the older version. The older version I've had for about 17 years. I've never failed to record in the field ever. I've had chefs pour water on it. I've had everything happen. But it's a lot more expensive. Yes?
How big is it?
It's tiny.
Tiny, okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to
So
tell.
I should have brought it because it's so small. So this is I can't pick that one up. So it's about twice the size of my charger brick. It's tiny. So I have the 6. They make these in a 3 mic, 6 mic, and 10 mic inputs. The 10 mic one is just a little bit wider. It's crazy. Like I have the 2-channel one, the original one, which is a lot bigger and heavier. It's a lot more expensive. These are not perfect, but they're pretty darn good. But I wouldn't go here unless you're doing this a lot, right? These are great devices. Don't drop this ever. If you drop this, it's toast. You can drop this, no worries. USB mics, I just pulled one. Rode, R-O-D-E. They make a good entry-level priced microphone. They've really built a following among the video community and podcasting community. They have a variety of ones. I just pulled, this is the desktop version. They have all kinds of different ones. If you're going to use a regular XLR, that's the 3-pin cable, not a USB mic, you're going to need some kind of converter to get it into your computer. Again, this is Rode's version. It's $160. So you can plug in two mics or 2 sources, run them into your device. Okay, let me just be clear though, if you have one of these, you don't need the DA, you're recording here, and the information's on a card, you're going to transfer it to your computer. So you don't need to worry about the AD converter at all. Okay, regular microphones. I spent 20 years recording everything with one of these. This is the legendary recorder's microphone. It costs $169. You can hammer nails with this thing. It is, you can drive over it. It doesn't care. It's fantastic. Omnidirectional. Microphones have a pattern. Sound they record in a pattern, and it'll tell you what kind of pattern it has. This is omnidirectional. It records in every direction. This is, you've seen these on stage, and every rock band has a Shure Beta 58 on stage. You can scream into them, you won't pop them, you can drop them, you can pour stuff on them. They're bulletproof. Not very expensive, $219. Editing software. This is a wide open area. This is Audacity. It's free, Mac and PC. It works pretty well. They all have the same kind of layout. They have tracks. You can add tracks, drop your audio in. So what you're seeing here is a wave form. Wave is a file format. Typically people just refer to this as the waveform, which is indication that there's audio. Little breaks mean it's quiet or there's no audio. You can add tracks. I can't remember how many tracks Audacity lets you have. More than you'll ever need. Free. GarageBand, also free on the Mac. Laid out a little differently. I find it kind of annoying, but lots of people do really good work with GarageBand. They record their records, they record their podcasts. It's awesome. It's free on the Mac.
What's the name again?
GarageBand on the Mac. It's on your, if you have a Mac, it's there. Yeah. This is Pro Tools, free version. Pro Tools is sort of like the industry standard for studio nonlinear editors. If you work at any recording studio, it's probably on Pro Tools. Pro Tools has a really bad reputation in the consumer community because it's really expensive. And they've started to really feel the pinch because what is happening is young people are not using it because it's too expensive. They're using something else. So they've actually introduced a free version that is pretty much fully enabled like a regular Pro Tools subscription. A full subscription, these are US dollars by the way, is $600 a year plus another $100 every year. I don't know why anybody would use anything but Pro Tools, personally, but that's just me.
So you would say Pro Tools is better than Reverb?
Depends what you're doing.
Okay.
If you have software that's doing what you want it to do, stay with it.
No, that's the problem is also my ex tried out, like I used one, I'm a voice actress and so is my friend, so we thought, why not do a podcast?
Yeah.
So then we got 2 microphones.
Yep.
It's not been working on GarageBand, and it's not been working on Audacity, so
Yep.
I'm like, what's next?
Right.
What do we do?
Right. We'll talk after.
Okay.
Because it may not be your software.
So is this for Mac users only?
Nope. Nope. Windows Mac. Everything is Windows Mac unless I say it's only one. This is Adobe Audition, also very, very popular. When I first started doing nonlinear editing, CBC had this amazing system that was horrible, that they paid a fortune for. All of us at Radio 3 were using Cool Edit Pro, which is the precursor to this. Adobe bought them. And it was like $20, and we could do anything with it. You can get if your company already has an Adobe suite, you probably have this in the suite already. If you have to buy it standalone, it's $21, that's US a month, forever. $21 every month, forever. It's awesome, it works really, really well. This is Hindenburg. It's a real favorite with journalists because it's super simple and it doesn't really demand a lot of your computer. It works really, really well. It's not very expensive. It's a one-time cost. These again are US dollars. The $95 version will probably do what you need it to do. I can't remember what the other features are with the more expensive version, but you probably don't need it. Again, same idea, lays out the tracks, you can mix them, you can change them, you can do stuff. It actually pre-labels stuff. And then I just wanted to show you, this is Spreaker. There's a few now that are totally online, they're apps, and all of the work is done online. Spreaker is unique in that it lets you go live with your podcast. So if you wanted to broadcast something live, you can use Spreaker to do that. As soon as I hit that start button, it creates the file, it uploads the file, and you can listen to the file in real time. Be a bit of a delay. Yeah?
What's the limitation of the free version of Pro Tools?
Tracks mostly,
So it only has like
48.
free
Yeah, more than you ever need. Yeah, the free version's really good. Here's the annoying thing about the free version of Pro Tools. It needs an internet connection to initialize.
only to initialize.
Yeah, you can work offline, and then what it likes to do is save the files back to the internet. It has a great collaboration. If you're working with other people, it's awesome, because you can actually share content back and forth. Yes?
A question about equipment and mics.
Yeah.
What's your advice if the interview, for example, is being done with someone who's not with you in the same room?
Yeah.
Like out there in the world?
Yeah. So you can do that with Skype, where their voice is recorded at their end, and you've got to retrieve that file. There's some tools that you can use to do that. There's a service called Zencaster. Zencaster records the person locally and then provides you with the file. So I would look at Zencaster because it makes it really easy. Those are called double enders. We used to hire somebody to go and record the person at the other end. Then they would send us cassette tape. We would dub the cassette tape, put it on reel-to-reel, try to match the stuff up. Zencaster is pretty good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Question over here.
Sorry, it's been answered, thank you.
Okay, corner.
You said that Spreaker can help you do like a live podcast.
Yes.
Is there another way to do that if you don't have Spreaker and you don't necessarily want to pay for it?
It's a little bit complicated. Serving a file live is actually a whole other deal. Yes?
What if you have to record a phone call?
Right, so,
I know it's not ideal, but
no, I use phoners. I'm going to play you some in a bit. I love phoners. I have a box, it's $400. And it splits the signal between my mic and the incoming channel, splits them so I can mix it. If you do a lot of phoners, you want to buy one. Right? You can do phoners with Skype, but they sound kind of shitty. Phone has a real cool quality to it. Now, if you have only a cell phone, you can get the same box, but you need a different version, which has got a Bluetooth enabled. And what it does is instead of you plugging the phone into the back of the box, it actually connects to your phone via Bluetooth. They're about $400.
and you said you have a slide coming up on that?
Well, I'll play you some audio. Yeah, I can give you the information later of the company that makes them. They're really great. They're called phone hybrids. Okay, where do you buy hardware? I mentioned Long and McQuaid. They're a great resource. Yes.
One update, there's also Cubase.
Yes.
Which come free if you buy the...
Yeah. That list of NLEs was very limited. There's probably another 10 that are really good, right? And Cubase comes free. You often will get free audio software with a piece of gear. So if you buy a Zoom, even the cheap $100 Zoom, you'll get a free bit of audio software.
Just while we're on hardware, do you have any opinion between USB mic and analog mic in terms of sound quality? Analog, yeah?
Yeah, I wouldn't bother with a USB mic.
Yeah.
I just think it's limiting. Where do you buy stuff? Long and McQuaid is a great resource because they can show you the stuff, they can play it for you, you can play with it, you can see it. You know, buy online if you want, absolutely. If you're going to buy audio gear a lot, go learn about True Audio in Burnaby. I love them. They know the stuff inside out. They'll tell you the stuff to buy. They'll make cables for you. They'll phone you at home, make sure you're tucked in. Like, they're wonderful people. And then if you're really going high end, if you want to build a home studio or you're working with someone who needs a home studio, or you really need like gear up the hoop, NX Pro and Venables, they're great. They're really expensive. Podcast hosts. I use Blueberry for my clients because most of my clients are on WordPress. Blueberry integrates completely with WordPress. So in fact, they never upload their podcast to Blueberry directly. They go to their web page, they create their episode, and there's an interface on the web page for them to put the data in that Blueberry needs in order to create the XML file. They hit a button and it goes up to Blueberry without them doing anything. They stay in WordPress. But all of these, and there's more than these, are all doing about the same thing. Kind of depends on what you need to do. And the reason the prices range is at the low end, they limit how much content you can have. At the higher end, they open up those limits and they offer other features. Almost all of them offer measurements so you can see how people are using your stuff. Shop around. Go read what they say. Try, if they have a free thing, try. The other thing people often are worried about is if I use one of these and I want to switch later, what happens? Because my XML files are all pointing to Blueberry. Well, here's the thing. These guys are also competitive now. If you go to Podbean or Blueberry or Buzzsprout, there's a page that says, want to transfer all your podcasts from Blueberry? Click this button. And it takes the XML file and just does a search and replace. Takes out the Blueberry URL, puts in your new URL. Done. Right? For like $5 a month US. It's crazy. I have no idea how they make money. I really don't. But it's great. Yeah, sorry.
I have a question about the double enders.
Yes.
You said Zencaster?
Zencaster.
Can you spell it?
Yes. Z-E-N.
Oh.
Caster.
Okay.
C.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and then the directories. Apple, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castro, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Spotify. There are others. If you want to go register with them all, absolutely. Go for it. Okay, I want to play you some stuff. I've talked forever. I need to do a little warning here though, because this is a bit of a trigger piece. I'm going to play you some audio that involves a suicide. Not somebody committing suicide, but talking about suicide. If that's something that is uncomfortable for you and you want to leave, I would ask you to do that now and I'll call you back in when it's done. I just don't want to play this without some kind of warning. So the background on this piece is I have a friend who in 2002 was a 40-year-old woman, top of her game, Vancouver 40 under 40, in Vancouver magazine. She had a company. She was based in London, England. She was doing great. Her husband went to Montreal and killed himself. And her life fell apart. So she moved back to Vancouver. I gave her a tape recorder. And I said, I'm happy to talk to you anytime about what's going on, but you know what? This might help you. So in 2002, she took this recorder. It was like a mini disc recording. You'll hear it because it's really noisy. And I didn't know what she did with it. 15 years later, 2017, she said, we should do something with all this audio. And so her and I sat down and I recorded her on film, listening to all this audio from 15 years ago. But the thing that came out was that her husband committed suicide in Montreal. She had gone to Montreal for the funeral, but she had never gone to the place where he committed suicide. He went to a park, hung himself in a park. And this park, in her mind, was this dark, horrible place. And she said, 15 years later, I would like to go to the park and find a way through this. So this podcast, so I was trying to tell this story. I couldn't tell it. It was like impossible. But I could wrap it around this 20-minute walk from where he was living to the park where he went and hung himself, because she wanted to do the walk. So I put a mic on her, and she walked that 20-minute walk, and that was the podcast. The podcast is 23 minutes long. I'm not playing you all of the podcast. I'm going to play you the beginning, which is we used the audio from when she was going through this experience shortly after it happened, and juxtapose that with her trying to reconcile that 15 years later. So this is the very opening of the podcast.
It's the early morning hours of Wednesday, October 2nd, 2002, 7 weeks ago today, probably at about this time. Montreal time would have been 4 o'clock, so that probably is the time of death, although I won't know that until I get a report from the coroner's office. But sometime around now, 7 weeks ago today, Barry walked for 20 minutes to a park where he hung himself from a tree. It's been 7 weeks of learning about myself in a way that I never knew that I could. This is my second night in a new apartment, my third apartment in the last 7 weeks.
So that's the opening of the podcast. So we set the scene, get the suicide explained right at the beginning. And then the rest of the podcast is really her journey to Montreal to find out about this park. So I'm going to play you another clip, which is her about to embark on the walk.
Journeys require a few things, don't they? They require effort and planning. This walk, this journey.
She sounds completely different, like a completely different person, right? So it was really interesting in the podcast, moving back and forth in time to that really vulnerable place where she's in the middle of the night, really in her apartment by herself, talking to this machine. And now she's 15 years later talking to me, really, or to the podcast listener.
Montreal, 15 years after my last visit, is requiring all that I have. But I'm doing it, and it's awful. Well, it will be awful, but at least it will be done. So we're here at Aunt Sue's house in Rosemere, Quebec, which is where Barry was staying when he died. I'm going to do the walk that Barry did to the park where he died. And I've been wanting to do it for a long time. I'm just going to follow the steps.
Space, right? Let those thoughts breathe. Do you notice all the birds? Yeah. So I interviewed her aunt and her mom and all these people in Montreal, and it was summer and there was all these birds, and it was fantastic because we're talking about death, the whole 25 minutes of fucking death, right? But there's all this life in these birds, and we get to the park and there's ducks and there's kids playing. It was fantastic, but all that noise, usually when you're recording, you try to get rid of it. And it was fantastic. I loved it. So she had a body mic on. I use a mic called a TRAM, T-R-A-M. They're again sort of famous in the field recording. They're quite expensive, about $500. They record the sound sort of like this. So she's talking as she's walking, but it's all really close mic. It sounds great. But it also picks up the birds and all this other noise. It's fantastic. Anyway, I'm going to move on to something a little bit more pleasant. This is, So I'm working with a woman in Portland, and she wrote a screenplay, and like most screenplays, nobody's interested. So I said to her, well, why don't we do a podcast? We've written this great screenplay, let's do a podcast. And so we're going to do a podcast together. This is just the intro. So what I said to her was, the intro is really important. You've got to tell people what it's about in a really short period of time. So this is her intro, and I think you'll get an idea what the podcast is about.
Hi, and welcome to Pocket Girl Podcast. I'm Alexandra, and this is my podcast. It started off as a spin-off of this movie I wrote, Pocket Girl, but it seems there might be some other ideas too. I'm going to read some essays I wrote, chat with people, and talk about stuff like dating and relationships, women supporting each other or not, and the endless fun that is misogyny, and that damn thing about finding your voice and being seen.
So, it's Alexandra talking about shit. And sometimes having some friends talk about shit as well. Awesome. I love her. Great. I think this podcast is going to be massive. Okay, I told you I love the phone. Yes?
Do you have any tips on how to add the background music to get
I will. I can talk about that in a bit. But yeah, it's a good question. Because you noticed it, right? music, voice, pace, right? You know how to do that? Edit, edit, edit. She didn't talk it like that. Close. In the studio world, you actually play the music in your headphones and you perform to the music. That's the best way to do it. But podcasting sometimes is limited. She was in Portland. She recorded that in her closet. I wasn't there. She sent me the audio, and then I took the music and I edited her voice to paste to the what are called posts in the music. And I also, you could see in the mix, I'm constantly moving the mix around so that the stuff's right here. Sometimes you don't want it right here, you want it lower. So there's a couple ways to do it. Yeah, go ahead. I told you I love the phone. I did a series of podcasts called Brain Picker. And Brain Picker was kind of influenced by Roland, who never edits anything. And the idea was that I would read something online that a friend of mine wrote or somebody wrote in a blog or whatever, and I would just call them and ask them about it. That was the whole premise. So there was no pretense at all. And here's just the beginning of one that I did with a friend of mine who's a writer.
Hello.
Hey, Spring, it's Robert.
Hi, Robert.
How are you?
I'm good.
Hey, I want to pick your brain on this post you have here called Inbreaded.
Okay.
It's kind of pornographic, this thing.
Pornographic? Slightly sensuous.
In a kind of bread porn way.
Can you tell that I'm a fan of terra bread?
You love bread.
It's a ridiculous phone call. But I love the phone. Like, I love that immediacy and that voice, that laughing voice on the phone. Sounds different than a laughing voice in person. So I love the phone. I use the phone a lot. And I'm doing another series right now with photographers, Instagram photographers, street photographers, and it's all on the phone. And it's great, because I just call the guys on the streets on his iPhone and talk to him. It's awesome. Okay. Are you guys still with me? What's the workflow? You want to do this. You've decided you're going to do it. You've got whatever equipment you need to do. You're ready to go. Format. I just played you some examples of 3 very different types of podcasts. There's really no limit of how these can be structured. Maybe it's you talking to yourself. Maybe it's you talking to your friend. Maybe it's you interviewing people and talking to your friend and talking to yourself. Maybe it's you, like whatever. Like Joe Rogan talks for 3.5 hours and it's fantastic, right? And other people do a 5-minute podcast. It can be long, short, whatever. But you should have a plan. So, because the plan is going to help you understand what you need to make it every week. Do you need to write anything? Do you need to find some music? Question about copyright, we'll get to in a sec. Do you need to book guests? And if you do, that's a big pain in the butt, because you're not paying them, so they're not going to be there when you need them. There's a bunch of stuff that happens, right? Plan it out, and put it on paper first and go, okay, I'm going to do, how many episodes am I going to do? Am I going to do 1 a week? If I'm going to do 1 a week, that's a lot. Am I going to do them like one week and then one the next week, or am I going to try to get ahead, or how's that going to work? For instance, I post to Instagram every day. It sounds like it should be really easy, but it's a lot of work, because some days, like today, I'm behind, I haven't posted, I'm tired, and I don't want to do it. And the reason podcasts fail is people just run out of juice. Is that a question? No. Okay. So do it on paper first and figure out what's involved. How many people are involved? If you're doing this for your company, or for your marketing director, or for a client, there are going to be things like sign-off. People are going to want to approve things. That's going to take some time. They're going to want to listen to it. They're going to go, oh, I don't like that. Could you make it more loud, or it's too loud, right? So all of that stuff is going to affect your timelines. Put your schedule on a calendar, show it to whoever needs to see it. I use Trello, which is a way of it's a software, it's project management software, but it's almost like Post-it notes online, and you can move them around. And it helps you keep things sorted out, sort of. And then here's the weird thing. You can't register your feed until you have a podcast. So I typically do a 30-second promo. And my entire first episode, I usually call it episode 0, is, hi, I'm Robert, this is my new podcast, please subscribe. I make that audio file, I make that my first podcast, I load that up to my podcast host, and my podcast host can now create an XML file for me that I can give to the directories. If I give the directories an XML file that has no audio in it, they'll reject it. So you got to do that first. The other thing about doing it first is you'll find out if it gets rejected. Gives you time to fix that. You'll find out what it looks like when you actually do it. How do the pictures look? Is it all okay? Oh, music. Okay, here are the top 3 myths about music use. I bought it on iTunes so I can use it. No. You bought it on iTunes so you can listen to it. I'm only using 10 seconds so it's okay. No. I'm pretty sure I have the CD at home so I can use it. No. If you do not have permission to use the music, you cannot play it. There's no exceptions. There's no little bit. There's no what ifs, wers, or whatever. Can't. Period. Copyright. So, what do? You can go and find free, royalty-free music. I listed a few sources. There's lots of them. There are going to be, directories with lots of music that you can use. Sometimes you have to give attribution under Creative Commons. So at the end of your podcast, you have to say music used, or maybe in the text, you say music used, Creative Commons license from so-and-so. Or you can buy from companies music to use in your podcast that is licensed, like you can buy stock art, same thing. I use a company called Premium Beat. They're based in Montreal. The reason I use them is that the way they sort the music makes it easy for me to find stuff, and the quality of the music is really good. It's really expensive. $50 US. So what's that, 75 bucks per track? So in the 20-minute walk, $700 worth of music. Doesn't take long, right? So if you are a musician, you can make your own music. Cool. If you have a musician friend who will let you use the music, great. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with royalty-free music. Yes?
One potential caveat, this really only affects, I think, people who are making podcasts centered around like curating music, discussing music, and want to use actual music. It limits, you wouldn't have access to iTunes, Spotify's directories, but Mixcloud, they primarily started for DJs to put the DJ sets, but they do have support for people on podcasts.
Yes.
So it's more than just, like, if you just want a song for your intro, not the place to do it.
Right. Yeah, and there are some fuzzy exceptions. As soon as you make money, those exceptions are going to be really problematic. So, I know lots of people using music that is not licensed and they have nobody's bothered them. It's not right, and you shouldn't do it. If you're going to do it, I can refer you to a lawyer named Jeff Young. It's about $400 an hour. When you get that letter from somebody, it's going to sell your car. Don't do it. Okay, what's the workflow? You're going to record first. You're going to edit. So you've done your recording of your whatever, you talking, your interview, whatever. You're going to take it into your NLE and you're going to edit it. You're going to change it, shorten it, make it better. Then you're going to do what's called mixing, which is adding. So if editing is removing or changing, mixing is adding. You're adding music, sound effects. You're layering those things in. So the Alexandra podcast example, she sent me just her voice. I took her voice, edited it, and then mixed it with music. Editing, how long is it going to take? Hard to say. I would say, rule of thumb, 5 to 1. So if it's 5 minutes long, it's going to take you, at minimum, half an hour to edit it. Probably longer than that. If it's going to the mix now, you could spend days. Like, it depends on your process and your format. It can be simple or very complicated. Once you've done your mix, you're going to have your file ready to go. You're going to have to get approval from somebody, make sure they sign off on it, and then you're going to finalize it. This may be, in fact, nothing more than simply saving it. You might need to make the levels proper. There's a way to normalize the levels so that they're kind of the peak is always at the same level. Your software will help you do that. Test it, make sure it works. Just because you saved it and it plays on your computer doesn't mean it actually works. All these files are compressed. So when you record them in the device, they're generally recorded as uncompressed audio. As soon as you make an MP3, MP3 is a way of compressing the file. And so sometimes things happen. Sometimes your computer, when it's doing that, has a little burp. And there'll be a little static inside the file, or there'll be a, just listen to it, I guess is all I'm saying. Check it. Then you're going to upload it. That XML file is going to get made. The directory is going to get updated. You're going to check that feed as well, make sure that that worked properly. A lot of the internet work is just checking that the stuff you did that was supposed to work did actually work. Okay, kind of running out of time. How do you make it better? These are really broad recommendations. Practice. You will get really good the more you do it. So when I started working at, I didn't do a lot of editing when I was a DJ. I did a lot of editing when I worked in news in Calgary because we used to interview people on the phone and then we would turn that into little 14-second clips. Did a lot of razor blade editing. That's how you did it in those days. At the radio show in Winnipeg, I worked there for 5 years. The rule was no interview could be longer than 5 minutes. And the host of the show, who was insane, never talked to anybody for less than 40 minutes. So my job was to take 40 minutes and turn it into 5 that made sense. And I did that every day, every week, for 5 years. I got really good at editing. So I think I'm actually pretty shit hot as an editor. But that's only from like grueling practice, practice, practice. It's not because I'm smart. It's not. Let me tell you something else about editing that's really going to save you time and energy. It's really easy to get lost in the weeds. You interviewed somebody for 20 minutes, you love the interview, you listen to it, you're trying to make it shorter, whatever you're trying to do, it didn't really make sense, you need to move stuff around. If you don't have to transcribe it. Ideally, if you transcribe it, you can see it on paper and you can make notes about what you should move where. And that's the best. When I did this for the radio show, I did what's called a paper edit. And at the beginning of every sentence or question, I would mark the time. So I would have a mark, 1 minute, he asked this question, 4 minutes, he asked this question, 7 minutes, he asked this question. And it just gave me a guide to where things were inside of that long 40 minutes of tape. That 40-minute long WAV file, that's pretty long too. It's really easy to get lost. So if you make an edit, if you do a paper edit, or if you have time to transcribe, it'll really help you in the long run. When you're doing a documentary, like 20-minute walk, 17 interviews, all sorts of sound, having a paper map is really helpful. I'm a big fan of the paper edit. I've had people send me audio files with a paper edit, and I totally do what they need done. Yes?
Someone has released a brilliant piece of software called Otter that
Yep.
free transcribes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good luck. Yeah, they're getting better.
Yeah.
The problem with transcription is that it doesn't do well with sounds that are weird or vocal patterns that are weird. It's great for guys, middle-aged white guys who talk the same. It doesn't like the phone, it doesn't like weird accents. But yes, you're absolutely right. There's a couple of them coming out and they're gonna get better. Transcribing is really tedious and time-consuming. I don't transcribe, I do a paper edit with topic question. In video, when you shoot video, you transcribe. You do a shot list and transcribe because it's just too much stuff. It takes too long otherwise. Okay, where should you put your money? Mics, mics, mics. Better mics. There was a question about USB mics earlier. Get a real mic. I use 3. I mean, I have lots of microphones, but I use 3 all the time. I have there was the pictures of the podcast I did do for Hobbs Rotary. There was that Neumann mic. That's my studio voice mic. Makes you sound like God. Right? It's fabulous. It's useless outside of a room. You can't hold it. Right? It picks up every sound in the world. But it is the most awesome sounding microphone ever. So if you want to interview someone, you want an intimate, really personal sound, that's what you get. One of those. Neumann's $1,500. That's the baby version.
What's it called?
Neumann, N-I-E-M-A-N-N. The one we typically use, the U87, $5,000. Right? The baby one's $1,500. It's still really good. I use that. Sorry?
What about that Rode NT USB?
I haven't used it. Can't tell you. I'll tell you this. You spend $200 on a mic, you're going to get a $200 mic. If you spend $800 on a mic, you're going to get a better microphone. There's no question. They have different patterns though, so really what you're shopping for is what do you need it for and what sound you need that microphone to capture. Because that $200 Rode might be perfect. So my 3 mics, my Neumann, when I go and interview people in the field, I take 2 microphones with me. I take a tram, which I attach to their lapel. The tram records all this. Sounds great. Yeah.
Is it, are we talking about a lab? Like,
Yeah.
say, but it picks up more sound?
It's fantastic. Awesome. The labs now are so good. The trams are just the best. And I bring a shotgun, Sennheiser shotgun mic. Sennheiser makes a really big shotgun and a small shotgun. A shotgun mic is very close like this. It doesn't record the stuff out here. It just records this. When you see people on TV, the guy, that's a shotgun mic usually. So what I do is I mic them with a tram and then I shotgun them. So now I've got 2 different slightly sounding versions of them talking. I get a bit more of the room with the tram. I get a little bit of their focused voice with the shotgun, but I can also record with the shotgun the environment. And then I mix that.
When you say USB mic, so like the Yeti is a USB mic.
Sorry?
I said when you say USB mic, are you talking about things like the Yeti mic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, anything that plugs directly into your computer is a USB mic.
But it would say you get a recorder, right?
Well, you're going to, if you use a USB mic, it's generally to record into your computer. Yeah, so then you wouldn't buy a recorder, you record straight into your computer. Here's where recording into your computer sucks. Almost anywhere other than at a desk. Right? I can go talk to somebody out here with my little gear, right? Hold a mic up, I hold one of those $160 microphones and my recorder's on my hip. I can walk around, I can follow them around, or I can stick a tram on them, wireless. They can go get on a bus and I can hear them. When I did Anthony Bourdain, he had a microphone on him when we went to the book signing. I actually used him on one channel and I plugged the microphone in the other channel and I went and interviewed people at the same time.
Is it possible to connect that tram to the like a Zoom or Tascam thing?
Yep, yep. So the tram you can plug in to XLR or you can plug it into a wireless.
I have a quick question about that. One of our issues is we're like about 3.5 feet away from one another, and I don't know if it's my audio interface or we're like it just needs to fiddle, or if it's the condenser microphone that we're using. We can hear each other when we get excited.
Yeah.
Like we're pitching up,
Yeah.
which is fine because it's in sync.
Yeah. So your microphones have a pattern.
Yeah.
And if you read the literature about your microphone, it'll say it records either this or a heart or a figure 8. Those patterns are overlapping. You're never going to get isolation ever. It's impossible. Right? Unless you've got a room that you could totally control.
Yeah, and you're right side.
Yeah. So you can either split out so the microphones are facing away from each other. There's some other things that can happen with that though, but try different setups.
Okay.
You might need to go to different microphones, but I would try just physically moving. They're overlapping is what's happening.
Okay.
So you're getting bleed. If you're in a band, be the drummer, right? You're playing the bass and you can hear the fucking drummer, right? Put him in a room. Put him in his own room. Get him out of here. Okay, good headphones. Don't do your podcast on your iPod headphones. I'm sorry, they're horrible. Get real headphones. Also, monitor when you're recording. You can't hear the mistakes. You can't hear them hitting the mic. You can't hear the ground fault in the cord. You can't hear the constant foot against the cord if you're not listening. Monitor when you're recording and use your good headphones, Sony MDRs. There's a number of versions of them. Best headphones you're ever going to have for making podcasts. And get some desktop speakers. If you only mix on headphones, your music mix is going to be way high if somebody listens just on a speaker. And how many YouTube videos have you watched without wearing headphones where you go, why is the music so friggin' loud? Because they mixed it with headphones on. Nobody listened to regular speakers. So you've got to find a balance between those two. Most of your people are going to be listening on headphones, that's true. But some people will be listening off their computer, and if it's, music's too loud, they're going to hate you. I would get a better recording device later. I would put your money in microphones. I would put your money in a decent set of headphones. You know, that the Zoom and Tascam makes one. There's a variety of them. They're all really good. Like, if we'd have had those 20 years ago, we would have been, oh, wow, this is amazing. How much was this? I'll sell my car for one of these. They're like $300. They're great. And taken care of, they'll do you just fine. But a better recording device will save you things like, it didn't work. It's too many knobs. Or I tried to unplug the mic and it broke. The XLR thing broke off. Or I just dropped it off the top of the table and it cracked the side of the thing. Right? But if you never go out in the field with it, it doesn't matter. Right? Put it in a nice little case. It'll be great. The better your source recording, so your question about the overlapping mics, you can sort of try to fix that in the mix, but it's hard. The better your source recording, the less time you're going to spend trying to fix it later. Better source recording comes from listening as you're recording, stopping and saying, oh, can we move that microphone because that actually sounds like crap? Or could you stop doing that? Or here, I'll move the cord so you're not playing with it. You put a wired microphone on somebody, they're going to play with the cable every time. And they're not going to do it right away. They're going to wait till you're well into the interview and then they're going to start doing this. Right? And you take it back home and you go, what is that noise? It doesn't stop. And also, hit the record button. As soon as you sit down, hit the record button. You've got like a 32 gig card in your machine, it'll record forever. I've done this. I went out as a junior reporter, interviewed, got fantastic interviews. Came home with my little cassette deck and went, there's nothing there. I forgot to play record, right? So my sound devices has a big red button on it. I can look over at it and see whether it's on or not right away. But press record, get lots. Record as soon as you get there. I'm working with a client in Denver, so he flew to Germany to interview a guy, and I said, okay, Ted, when you get to the hotel, you're going to walk 8 blocks to go meet this guy. Put your thing on and turn it on, and don't turn it off until you get back on the plane. Because shit happens. And it did. Like, he met somebody on the street, and he got directions, and it was all really cool stuff to add. It was never planned. Record everything. Get feedback from your friends. Not just, oh, that was great, but when did you get bored? Or when did you turn it off? Or what couldn't you understand? And then just listen to lots of podcasts, because you're going to get lots of great ideas from what other people are doing. You're going to try to do that, and try to emulate them, and that's a good thing. Okay, I am done. Oh, I have one other thing I want to play for you. Sorry. It's very short.
You're on the road almost constantly now. Do you miss being in the kitchen?
I miss sitting at the bar after a busy shift, feeling like on top of the world, you know, hanging out with my cooks, knowing I put in a really busy night. But the work, standing on my feet 14 hours a day, no, I don't miss it. I had 30 years of it. I mean, I could probably lie, oh yes, I really miss it. It's my heart, it's my soul. 30 years I had. It's a lot of knee bends.
Yeah, is there stuff you don't do? Like you like to try stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But is there stuff you just, like, are you afraid of heights, or you don't ride a bike?
I'm afraid of karaoke. Dancing in public, you know, I'm way past the age where any sensible person should have to see that. I'm afraid of clowns and nurses' shoes and rats. So I won't be eating rat. I don't care how delicious some might believe them to be. I'm afraid of, like, you know, mediocrity. Like, that terrifies me.
That's all I got. Thanks. Thank you. I've got business cards here. You can just email me at info@bixnet.com. I can give you my card. If you have questions, just email me, and I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
How can we make profits?
It's a whole other thing. It's like music. Write a hit. How do you make money at podcasting? Have lots of people love it. I mean,
And then if they do, how does the money come?
oh, there's sponsorship. You can buy a service and they'll roll commercials in. They'll sell your. Don't worry. If you've got people, somebody will pay. Get the people though. That's the hard part. There's other things you can do, but yeah.
Okay, first, thank you.
You're welcome.
Second, what's the name of the device to make the phone call?
It's a phone hybrid.
Phone hybrid.
Trying to remember the name of the company. It's a pretty unique device. Why don't you email me and I'll send you the link to it.
And third, we use Zencaster because my co-host is in Mexico.
Yeah.
But sometimes we're having problems because we're downloading two files and it's not.
They're not
really
syncing?
Really synced.
Yeah.